Russia has overtaken Australia as one of the top 5 most powerful countries in Asia, according to the Lowy Institute's latest Asia Power Index. This scorecard looks at defence networks, economic relationships and diplomatic influence, amongst other things, with the US still in the top position, but China and Russia gaining ground. Lowy Institute analyst Susannah Patton joins me now to discuss this further. Susannah, welcome and thank you. Now, there's a bit of a shift going on here. Broadly speaking, what are we seeing?
Well, this year the US recorded its lowest ever score on record since the Lowy Institute started publishing the Asia Power Index in 2018. And I think what that really points to is both structural challenges that the US faces in competing with faster growing countries like China and India, but also the fact that that under the Trump administration, many US policies have been a net negative for US influence in Asia. In particular, the very large-scale US tariffs that were announced on many countries in the region have been a negative for US diplomatic standing in the region. Now, we'll only see the full impact of that play out in the years ahead, but I think the lack of clear US strategy for Asia and these harmful policies have really given an opportunity to China to establish itself as the region's leading diplomatic country. And China this year recorded its highest ever score for diplomatic influence.
And I know it's a complex measure, but put simply, how do you determine how powerful a country is in a certain region, in this case Asia?
Well, we look at both countries' resources, so the underlying size and quality of their economies, the size of their military forces. We look at demographics to take into account future changes, and then we look at what countries do with what they have. So in other words, their relationships, thinking about diplomatic interactions, defence networks, economic engagement, so trade and investment, as well as cultural influence and their projection through media and other soft power. So it's a very complex measurement, but I think in this era where we see so much contestation between China and the United States and a real battle of narratives about who is leading in Asia, the value of our data is that it does provide some kind of evidence base that we can use to track the changing distribution of power in Asia.
And honing in, what are Russia and China doing to gain the influence that we're seeing here?
Well, one thing that we've seen this year is much closer coordination between China and Russia, and much closer coordination as well with a range of other authoritarian countries, including North Korea. And that has really aided countries like Russia and China because they've been deepening their economic relationships as well as their defence and security ties with each other. So that's certainly one element. And I think, in the case of Russia as well, we've just seen that it's been much more able to withstand US and Western sanctions than many analysts had initially predicted following its 2022 invasion of Ukraine. So this phenomenon of fortress Russia means that it's been able to sustain its position even despite the heavy toll of its ongoing war on Ukraine.
Now, we know Australia has been striking security agreements in the region, but we have slipped out of the top 5. Why is that, and what could we do to fix that?
So I think the challenge for Australia is not so much in our level of engagement or activity with many countries in the region, because our diplomacy and our defence engagement remains extremely high. I think the challenge for Australia in the long term is, do we have the resources that are required to actually sustain that? So thinking about our military capability, Australia has not been making as many new gains as other countries in our region, notably China, which is engaged in a very rapid military modernisation. That means that Australia is potentially making security commitments and striking new partnerships with countries, but its ability to actually resource and follow through on those commitments remains in question.
And this index, it's been tracking this power in Asia since 2018. Why is that important, and what decisions can be made off the back of that data?
Well, I think in 2018, when the Lowy Institute established the Asia Power Index, the assumption was that China was on an inevitable pathway to eclipse the United States, and that we were on the precipice of a kind of power shift. Instead, what we've actually seen is that the US has remained the most powerful country in Asia. And we've seen, I think, in the way that many countries have responded to the Trump administration this year, that the US does have incredible latent power, and that China isn't on a pathway to eclipse it. But China is, I think, in this edition, starting to close the gap. And so what we can really do with this data is have a better picture of this changing distribution of power, which enables countries to make their own policy decisions in light of an accurate understanding of the geopolitics of the region.
Lowy Institute analyst Susannah Patton, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.